Ivana Bacik, please.
Yesterday we heard further evidence as to just how deep the cost of living crisis is biting households around the country. We heard it from FLAC, the Free Legal Advice Centres, telling us how calls to their helplines are up, and we heard it particularly from Barnardo's, describing to us in such shocking terms how so many families cannot afford decent clothes for their children or decent shoes for their children, forced to buy open-toed shoes in the hope that sandals or flip-flops in the hopes that those will last longer, and simply unable to afford basic food. And we hear it everywhere we go, we hear it. I heard from a constituent of mine in Dublin Bay South, an assistant manager in a restaurant. He tells me he has started to pick up additional shifts in another restaurant, as well as shifts with a private home care provider, just to be able to keep on top of his rent and provide for his family. Another constituent on a good salary cannot find a place to rent and has now been invited to make bids in an auction, a bidding auction. A landlord saying, tell me what you're willing to pay, because there are plenty more who will pay more if you don't. And yesterday, with our colleague Senator Marie Sherlock in Dublin Central, visiting with Brother Kevin and his team in the Capuchin Day Centre, I heard there how in the North Inner City they are seeing such a shocking increase in the numbers of families coming in for the free dinner service. Those working, those on low income, bike couriers working for companies like Deliveroo, delivering food to others but unable to afford food for themselves. And that's the shocking reality. And I heard, Taoiseach, your response to the earlier question, and I think you're right about, of course you're right about the war in Ukraine. Putin's brutal war has had a horrific knock-on effect, not only for all the civilians who have been so, even yesterday, so tragically killed in Ukraine, but also for all of us across Europe as we see the cost of living crisis deepen. But the point is this: whoever caused the crisis, the response is up to government here. We have control of the response in this country, and we are a country that is wealthy by European standards, and we are a country that saw massive state intervention to deal with COVID-19, a massive response, a public sector investment that saw us pivot so swiftly and so well to deliver pandemic unemployment payment and to deliver the wage support schemes and all of the other measures that were introduced. And we need to see that level of intervention now to address the cost of living crisis. Whatever the cause, and acknowledging the massive international causative factors, the response is within our control. And here in Ireland, we in Labour have called for measures to be introduced urgently, swift measures to be introduced now to address the real concerns so many families and households face, as we see in just 6 weeks' time the back-to-school crunch coming, as families will be facing into having to buy school books, having to look at increased fuel costs, and seeing costs of basic food items, bread, milk, basic items rising too. And there's a real fear around that. And even a small set of targeted measures introduced now before the summer recess would make a difference in the confidence of families and households that they will be able to face into the winter, a winter in which we all know the cost of living crisis is only going to deepen, and in which the real hardship that I saw yesterday in the Capuchin Centre, that real hardship is going to get even worse for families and for individuals.
But first of all, as I said, the government has responded, and there seems to be a complete, so just brushing aside the fact that €2.5 billion has been allocated to cost of living measures, and we're going to do more. But we're going to do it in a comprehensive way, as I say, embracing pay, and in the private sector, you know, the latest CSO data on wages is showing that the average weekly earnings in Q1 2022 were up 10% from the same period 2 years ago in Q1 2020. And the public service pay talks is adjourned, but it is the wish of all to see can we work out a resolution of that on the public service pay front. But we also need to work out expenditure-wise, department by department, because the ideal way to approach this, we can't create inflation in our response. This is different to the pandemic in terms of the nature of our response. This isn't an issue where you can put 10 billion in on the table straight away over a period of time, because that obviously would be very inflationary. But what you have to do is targeted and temporary measures. And that's what the ESRI are saying and others are saying, and we will evaluate those reports in terms of what is the best way to target resources to reduce pressures on people, but to do it in a way also that facilitates better policy in terms of public transport, for example, in terms of healthcare costs. And we've brought healthcare costs down now. If you take the drug payment threshold down to €80, which is beyond what was even recommended in Sligo Care. And today, again, the legislation is coming in now to abolish inpatient charges, for example. So in a systemic way, can we reduce costs for people in their everyday lives, not just now, but for the period right throughout the next winter and beyond into 2023. And that would also dovetail with sensible policies. But there will be a package at the budget time that will impact in this calendar year on the pressures that people are facing in respect of the cost of living. And it has to be, as IFAC has said, it has to be carefully balanced in terms of how the government responds. And they acknowledge that the government faces a very delicate balancing act in protecting the economy and poorer households from higher energy and food prices, while avoiding adding to inflation through second-round effects. And we do want to avoid second-round effects. And I've been saying that consistently from the get-go, because that's what happened in the 1970s. And we ended up with spiralling inflation that got worse and worse every year. And we need to avoid that. We do need to target our measures, and we must make sure that those on the lowest incomes are well protected. But then there are workers as well who, after tax, are in difficult positions because of this crisis also. And we have to have measures that can marry that. But if we want to do something significant on childcare, for example, well, you can't do packages in isolation month to month. You need to deal with the expenditure, what expenditure will be allocated to the Department of Children next year, for example, to enable us to do something significant on childcare costs for people. Those are the type of evidence-based approaches that we require, and in social dialogue as well, with the partners to work out that.
Well, Taoiseach, we're very happy to work constructively with government to ensure that targeted measures are introduced that tackle the real hardship being faced by those on the lowest of incomes. We're prepared to sit it beyond, absolutely, through the summer if it takes that to deal with the sort of targeted measures that are necessary. Things like a summer social welfare bonus that could be introduced as a targeted measure to alleviate real hardships faced by those on such low incomes. And we're very much prepared to do that, and we very much accept that measures have been taken by government. And we also accept, of course, that the challenges are different with the cost of living crisis to COVID. But what should be the same is the political will to deliver a strong state response, and the sort of creativity and ingenuity we saw in delivering the government and state responses to COVID. That's the sort of political will we need to see now in delivering measures that will alleviate hardship for families and households across the country. We do support a vastly increased investment in childcare. We've been calling for the Donna O'Malley moment in childcare to ensure that families will see a place guaranteed for each child in this country. That's essential, and we know that will take some time. But there are some targeted measures that could be introduced in the next few weeks that would help to alleviate the real hardship facing so many.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the offer of constructive engagement with government in terms of coming forward with ideas or viewpoints in respect of tackling this issue, and that's something that government would welcome and would respond to any constructive ideas that you bring forward in relation to this issue. But I come back to the fundamental point, is this: we cannot chase inflation from month to month, but what we can do, the political will is there. The political will, you correctly point out, was there during COVID-19, when I think up to 48 billion overall was spent to underpin workers' salaries, to underpin enterprises, to keep jobs. We still have a strong economy in terms of full employment almost. We want to protect that as best we can, although the forecasts and predictions are for the markets that we export to, that by the end of the year or into next year, they will be slowing down significantly in terms of growth, and that's bound to impact on us at some stage of the economic cycle. So we do want to protect the jobs we've created. We have come out of COVID very strongly economically because of the policies we took. The same political will exists in relation to tackling the cost of living pressures on people. Agus tá rialtas caithfidh mé é seo órá an phríomhrud ná plán cuimseach láidir a chur a fáil. Anas go mbeidh in an brú atá a dhaoine faoi láthair a íslú agus an almas fearr é sin a dhéanamh ná le ling an Conaisnéis.
Very good. Deputy Breed.